The night shift at Blackwell Tower was Leo's favorite time. For the past 7 years, he had worked as the janitor in this gleaming building of glass and steel, moving through the empty halls like a ghost while the city slept below. The quiet suited him. During these hours, the towering office building transformed from a buzzing hive of business into a peaceful sanctuary. Tonight was Friday, which meant cleaning the executive floors. Leo pushed his cart out of the service elevator and into the softly lit hallway of the 87th floor. He liked the executive level best, not because of the fancy furniture or the breathtaking views, but because of what waited in the corner of the main conference room, a stunning grand piano. The piano didn't belong there, not really. It was a strange choice for a corporate meeting space, but Mr. Blake, the owner of Blackwell Industries, apparently insisted on having it. Rumor had it that he never played it. It was just for show, like so many things in his life. Leo finished mopping the hallway, then moved to the conference room. The massive space had floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the city's twinkling lights. In the corner stood the piano, its polished black surface gleaming under the soft overhead lights. He went about his usual routine, emptying trash bins, wiping down surfaces, vacuuming the plush carpet. All the while, his eyes kept drifting to the piano. Each time he passed near it, his fingers itched with a familiar longing. When he finally finished his tasks, Leo checked his watch. It was just past midnight and he still had 2 more floors to clean. He should move on. He knew he should. But the piano called to him as it did every Friday night. Usually, he just allowed himself to dust it carefully, running his cloth over the smooth surface, maybe lifting the lid to admire the strings and hammers inside. Sometimes, when he was feeling particularly brave, he would sit on the bench for just a moment, not touching the keys, just remembering. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the unusually clear night sky, or the fact that it had been exactly 10 years since he'd last performed in public. Whatever the reason, Leo found himself sitting at the bench, his cleaning supplies forgotten. He lifted the cover, revealing the keys, perfect black and white soldiers standing at attention. For a long moment he just stared at them, his heart beating faster. What would happen if I played? He whispered to the empty room. Just once? The building was empty. The security guards were stationed in the lobby, 87 floors below. No one would hear, no one would know. Leo placed his fingers on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness. How many nights had he dreamed of this? How many times had he passed music stores and stopped, looking longingly through the windows? He pressed down gently and a clear, perfect note rang out in the silent room. The sound hung in the air, wrapping around him like an old friend's embrace. Before he knew it, his hands were moving, playing the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune. The piece he had played at his final recital before life took an unexpected turn. His fingers were stiff at first, clumsy from lack of practice. But muscle memory is a powerful thing, and soon they remembered their purpose. The music flowed from him, soft and hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. As he played, the years fell away. He wasn't Leo the janitor anymore. He was just a man reunited with his first love. So lost was he in the music that he didn't hear the elevator ding, didn't notice the footsteps approaching the conference room. It wasn't until the lights suddenly brightened that he became aware he wasn't alone. Leo's fingers stumbled on the keys, producing a jarring chord as he jerked his head up. Standing in the doorway was a man in an expensive suit, his cold eyes narrowed in displeasure. Leo jumped to his feet, his heart hammering. "Mr. Blake, I'm so sorry, I was just what?" Richard Blake asked, his voice as sharp as broken glass. "Just using my personal property without permission? Just neglecting your actual duties?" Leo's face burned with shame. In 7 years, he had never directly encountered the billionaire owner of Blackwell Industries. Of course, he knew what Richard Blake looked like. His face was plastered across business magazines and local newspapers regularly. In person, he was even more intimidating. Tall and lean with piercing blue eyes and a perfectly tailored suit despite the late hour. "I apologize, sir," Leo said, taking a step back from the piano. "It won't happen again." Richard moved further into the room, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. His gaze drifted from Leo to the piano and back again, calculating and cold. "You're the night janitor," he stated rather than asked. "Yes, sir. Leo Reyes." And you think playing my piano is part of your job description, Mr. Reyes? Leo swallowed hard. No, sir. I got carried away. It was unprofessional, and I take full responsibility. To his surprise, Richard walked closer to the piano, running his finger along its glossy surface. Debussy, wasn't it? Clair de Lune? Leo blinked in surprise. Yes, sir. A hint of something, perhaps curiosity, flickered across Richard's face before disappearing behind his mask of indifference. You play, interestingly, not well, but interestingly. Despite his precarious position, Leo felt a flicker of pride. He knew he was rusty, knew his technique had suffered from years of neglect, but the music was still inside him. Thank you, I think. Richard raised an eyebrow. It wasn't a compliment. He moved to the windows, looking out at the city spread below them. For a long moment he said nothing, and Leo wondered if he should leave or wait to be dismissed or fired. Do you know why I keep a piano here, Mr. Reyes? Richard asked without turning around. No, sir. It reminds me that some things can't be bought. Now Richard turned, his expression unreadable. I've hired the best pianists in the world to play for me. People who have spent their lives mastering their craft. People who understand that true skill comes from discipline, not emotion. Leo nodded, unsure where this was going. He clutched his cleaning cloth tightly, waiting for the inevitable dismissal. Instead, Richard laughed, a short, humorless sound. And yet none of them played with whatever that was that you just displayed. That raw, untrained feeling. He said the last word as if it tasted strange on his tongue. Leo remained silent, sensing that anything he might say would only make things worse. Richard walked back to the piano, closing the lid with careful precision. How long have you been working here, Mr. Reyes? 7 years, sir. 7 years, Richard echoed. Cleaning floors and emptying trash when you clearly have other talents. How ordinary. The words stung, but Leo kept his expression neutral. We can't all be billionaires, sir. For a second he thought he'd gone too far, but to his surprise a ghost of a smile touched Richard's lips. No, we certainly can't. Richard straightened his already perfect tie. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Reyes. You're going to finish your shift tonight. You'll come back to work on Monday, and you will never touch my piano again without explicit permission. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Relief washed over Leo. He wasn't being fired after all. Richard turned to leave but paused at the door. Unless, Leo looked up. Sir? There was something new in Richard's eyes now. A gleam of challenge, perhaps even mischief. Unless you can prove that whatever talent you possess is more than just an accident of emotion. I don't understand. Richard turned fully to face him now. It's simple. If you can play the piano well enough, truly well enough to impress me, then I'll marry you. Leo choked on air. What? A cold, mocking smile spread across Richard's face. You heard me. If your playing is as special as you seem to think it is, then prove it. Impress me, really impress me, and I'll marry you on the spot. Leo stared, dumbfounded. But you're not serious. Oh, but I am. In my experience, people only truly perform when the stakes are impossibly high. Richard's eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. So here are your impossibly high stakes, Mr. Janitor. Play well enough and you'll never have to clean another floor again. You'll go from rags to riches, just like in those fairy tales people love so much. He laughed again, and this time the sound was like ice cracking. Of course, we both know that won't happen. Because despite whatever raw emotion you might accidentally stumble upon, you lack the discipline, the training, the sheer excellence required to truly master that instrument. He gestured dismissively at the piano. But by all means, feel free to try. With that, Richard Blake walked out, leaving Leo standing alone in the conference room, the echo of those mocking words hanging in the air between him and the silent piano. What Richard didn't know, what no one in this building knew, was that Leo Reyes had once been Leonard Reynolds, the promising young pianist whose career had been cut short by family tragedy and financial ruin. And in the quiet of the night, with the challenge ringing in his ears, Leo made a decision. He would play again. Not for the mockery of marriage, not for the billions of dollars, but for himself, to reclaim the piece of his soul he had locked away for far too long. And if, in the process, he wiped that smug smile off Richard Blake's face, well, that would just be a bonus. Word spread quickly through Blackwell Tower. By Monday morning, every employee from the mailroom to the executive suites was talking about how the night janitor had been caught playing the boss's piano, The stories grew wilder with each retelling. Some said Leo had been fired on the spot. Others claimed he'd been promoted to the music department, though Blackwell Industries, being a tech and real estate company, didn't have a music department. Only Gina from the front desk security team knew part of the truth. She'd been monitoring the cameras that night and had seen the whole encounter, though without audio. When she cornered Leo in the break room, her eyes were wide with curiosity. "So it's true? You were playing his piano and he caught you?" Leo sighed, stirring his cheap coffee. "News travels fast. Are you kidding? This is the most exciting thing to happen here since Mr. Blake brought that famous actress to the Christmas party." She leaned closer. "What did he say to you? You're obviously not fired." "No, I'm not fired." Leo took a sip of his coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. "He just told me not to touch the piano again." It wasn't the whole story, but he couldn't bring himself to share the billionaire's bizarre challenge. It was too ridiculous, too embarrassing. Who would believe him anyway? Gina looked disappointed. "That's it?" "The way he was looking at you, I thought for sure there was more to it." "Looking at me? You were watching?" She shrugged, not even slightly ashamed. "Security cameras, remember? No audio, though. But I've worked here long enough to read Mr. Blake's body language. He seemed interested, and that never happens." Leo felt his face grow warm. It's nothing, really, but it wasn't nothing. As the days passed, Leo found himself thinking constantly about Richard Blake's mocking challenge and what it meant. Not the marriage part. That was clearly a joke, a way for the billionaire to emphasize how impossible he thought it would be for someone like Leo to impress him. No. What kept Leo awake at night was the piano. The feel of the keys beneath his fingers. The music that had flowed from him after so many years of silence. It had awakened something he'd tried hard to bury. A week after the encounter, Leo noticed something strange. The security camera in the executive conference room, which had always been pointed at the door, was now angled to include the piano in its view. It could be a coincidence, but Leo doubted it. That night, as he cleaned the executive floor, he paused by the piano. His fingers hovered over the closed lid. He could almost hear Richard's voice. "You will never touch my piano again without explicit permission." Leo pulled his hand back and continued with his work. But the next Friday, when he entered the conference room, he found a folded note on top of the piano. In elegant handwriting, it read simply, "Permission granted." RB Leo stared at the note, his heart racing. Was this a trap, a test? Or had the billionaire's curiosity gotten the better of him? There was only one way to find out. He sat at the bench, adjusted his position, and began to play. This time he chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. As he played, he glanced up at the security camera. Its small red light blinked steadily, watching him. Somewhere in the city, was Richard Blake also watching? The thought should have made him nervous, but instead it fueled him. His fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. The music swelled and receded like ocean waves, filling the empty room with beauty. When he finished, the silence felt different somehow, expectant. But no one burst through the door. No phone rang. The night continued as usual, except for the lightness in Leo's heart as he completed his rounds. The next day, Saturday, Leo received a text from his boss asking him to come in for an extra shift. This was unusual but not unheard of. Sometimes there were special events on weekends that required additional cleaning. When he arrived, his boss handed him a pass card he'd never seen before. "You're to clean the penthouse today," his boss said, looking as confused as Leo felt. "Direct orders from upstairs." "The penthouse?" "But that's Mr. Blake's private—" "I know what it is," his boss interrupted. "Just do it, and for heaven's sake, don't break anything." The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of Blackwell Tower. Unlike the sleek, modern offices below, it was decorated in a more classic style, with richly patterned rugs, leather-bound books, and artwork that even Leo's untrained eye could tell was valuable. And in the center of the main room stood another grand piano. Not the one from the conference room. This one was older, with a warm, honeyed wood finish instead of black lacquer. Leo approached it cautiously. There was no note this time, but a piece of sheet music was positioned on the stand. It was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the piano repertoire, and coincidentally the last piece Leo had been working on before he abandoned music a decade ago. This was no coincidence. This was a test. For 2 hours, Leo cleaned the penthouse, all the while eyeing the piano and the sheet music. When he finished, he stood before the instrument, indecision tearing at him. This felt different from playing in an empty conference room. This was Richard's home, his private space, yet the sheet music felt like an invitation, or perhaps a dare. Leo sat at the bench. The keys felt different under his fingers. This piano was older but impeccably maintained, with a richer, more nuanced sound. He began to play the Rachmaninoff piece, rusty at first, stumbling over the complex passages. Then something clicked. Years of training rushed back, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. His hands stretched to reach the difficult chords, his fingers finding their way through the intricate patterns. He lost himself in the music, forgetting where he was, who might be listening. When the piece ended, he sat in silence, breathing hard as if he'd run a race. "Interesting choice," said a voice behind him. Leo jumped to his feet, nearly knocking over the bench. Richard Blake stood in the doorway, dressed casually in a way Leo had never seen before. Dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that probably cost more than Leo's monthly rent. "I'm sorry," Leo said automatically. "I thought the music." "It was an invitation," Richard confirmed, walking into the room. "Though I didn't expect you to accept it quite so thoroughly." Leo struggled to read the expression on the billionaire's face. Was he angry? Amused? Impressed? It was impossible to tell. "You've had training," Richard said. "It wasn't a question." Leo nodded. "A lifetime ago. And yet you're cleaning floors." "Life doesn't always work out the way we plan," Leo said, a edge creeping into his voice. "Some of us don't have trust funds to fall back on." To his surprise, Richard didn't take offense. Instead, he moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He offered one to Leo. "I don't drink during work hours," Leo said. "It's Saturday, and I'm technically your boss's boss's boss. Consider it a direct order." Reluctantly, Leo accepted the glass. The liquid burned pleasantly as he sipped it. "Juilliard," Richard said abruptly. Leo nearly choked on his drink. "What? You studied at Juilliard?" "Class of 2014. You were on track for a promising career until you dropped out suddenly at the beginning of your final year." Richard's eyes held Leo's. "Did I miss anything?" A cold feeling spread through Leo's chest. "You investigated me." Richard shrugged unapologetically. "Of course I did. You think I'd let just anyone play my grandmother's piano without knowing who they are?" "Your grandmother's—" Leo looked back at the piano with new respect. This was hers? Something softened in Richard's expression. "She taught me to play when I was a child. I was never very good, no natural talent. But she said music wasn't about talent. It was about feeling." He took a drink. "I thought that was nonsense. Until I heard you play Claire de Lune last week." Leo didn't know what to say. This was a side of Richard Blake he'd never expected to see. Human, almost vulnerable. "Why did you quit?" Richard asked. The question hit Leo like a physical blow. "Family emergency. My father got sick. Cancer. No insurance." The old pain surfaced even after all these years. Bills piled up. Someone had to work. "My sister was still in high school, so you gave up your dream to clean offices at night and work construction during the day," Richard finished for him. How very noble. The way he said it should have made Leo angry, but there was something in Richard's tone. Not mockery, but something closer to regret. As if he genuinely thought it was a shame. "It was what it was," Leo said simply. "We don't all have choices." Richard studied him for a long moment, then set down his glass. "Play something else. Something you love." "Not for me, not for my challenge. Just for yourself." Leo hesitated, then turned back to the piano. Without sheet music this time, he began to play a piece he had composed himself years ago. It was simple compared to Rachmaninoff, but it held all the emotions of that difficult time, the love for his family, the pain of letting go, the quiet determination to keep going. When he finished, he didn't turn around immediately. He was afraid of what he might see on Richard's face. "Monday night," Richard said quietly. 7 o'clock. The Athenaeum Club downtown. "There's someone I want you to meet." Leo finally turned. "Who?" Richard's expression had changed again, closed off, businesslike. "Just be there. Tell them at the door you're my guest." With that, he walked out, leaving Leo alone with the piano and 1,000 questions. The Athenaeum Club stood like a fortress of old money in the heart of downtown. Its stone facade, weathered by a century of city life, loomed over Leo as he approached the entrance Monday evening. He'd spent his entire Sunday paycheck on renting a decent suit, and he still felt underdressed. The doorman eyed him suspiciously. "Can I help you?" "I'm here as a guest of Richard Blake," Leo said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. The doorman's demeanor changed instantly. "Of course, sir. Mr. Blake is waiting for you in the Mozart room." Inside, the club was all dark wood, leather chairs, and hushed conversations. Paintings of stern-looking men lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow Leo as a staff member led him through a maze of corridors. Leo had cleaned the homes and offices of the wealthy for years, but he'd never been invited into their world as a guest. The Mozart room turned out to be a small concert hall with about 50 seats arranged in a semicircle around a gleaming grand piano. Most of the seats were already filled with people in expensive evening wear, sipping champagne and chatting quietly. Richard stood near the piano, deep in conversation with an elderly man. When he spotted Leo, he waved him over. "Right on time," Richard said, sounding pleased. "Leo, this is Dr. Anton Visser. He was the head of the piano department at Juilliard for 30 years. Leo's heart skipped a beat. Dr. Visser had been a legend at the school, though he had retired before Leo's time there. "Mr. Reyes," Dr. Visser said, shaking Leo's hand firmly despite his age. "Richard has told me quite a story about you. I'm curious to hear if your playing lives up to his description." Leo shot Richard a look. "I wasn't aware I'd be playing tonight. Weren't you?" Richard's smile was all innocence, but his eyes gleamed with mischief. "Why else would I invite you to a room with a piano and an audience?" Before Leo could respond, Richard turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice. As promised, I have a special treat for you tonight." The room quieted immediately, all eyes turning to Richard. "Many of you have heard me complain over the years about the state of modern classical piano. Too technical, too precise, too soulless." Richard's voice carried easily through the room. "Dr. Visser here has been telling me for decades that I simply hadn't heard the right pianist yet." Leo wanted to sink through the floor. Was this all an elaborate setup to humiliate him? To prove some point in an ongoing argument between Richard and this old professor? "A week ago," Richard continued, "I had the most unusual experience. I returned to my office late at night and found the janitor playing my piano." There were a few chuckles from the audience. "I know, it sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. But what I heard changed something in me." He turned to Leo. "This is Leo Reyes. He's going to play for us tonight. And I promise you, whatever you're expecting, this will be different." With that, Richard stepped back, gesturing for Leo to take the piano bench. Leo stood frozen for a moment, panic rising in his throat. He hadn't prepared anything. He hadn't touched a piano in the 2 days since the penthouse. He wasn't ready for this. Dr. Visser leaned close to him. "Just play what you feel, young man. Nothing more, nothing less." Somehow Leo found himself seated at the piano, staring at the keys. The room was silent, expectant. He could feel Richard's eyes on him, along with 50 strangers who had probably paid good money to be here. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. He started with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that had always moved him. His fingers felt stiff at first, his tempo uneven, but as the music progressed, something inside him opened up. The years of not playing, of holding back this essential part of himself, had created a well of emotion that now poured through his fingers into the keys. He played with his eyes closed, letting the music take him. When the Chopin piece ended, he moved seamlessly into Liszt's Un Sospiro, a cascade of arpeggios that rippled like water. From there, he flowed into one of his own compositions, something he'd created during those dark days after leaving Juilliard. When he finally finished and opened his eyes, the room remained silent. For one horrible moment, Leo thought he'd failed completely. Then he saw the faces of the audience. Some were crying. Others sat with eyes closed as if still hearing the music, and a few were staring at him with expressions of wonder. Dr. Visser broke the silence with applause, and suddenly the entire room erupted. People stood clapping enthusiastically, a few calling bravo. Leo's eyes found Richard, who remained seated, his expression unreadable. As the applause died down, Dr. Visser approached the piano. Mr. Reyes, that was extraordinary. You have a rare gift. The technical elements need refinement, certainly. 10 years of not playing will do that, but the emotional content. He shook his head. I haven't heard playing like that in many years. People began to crowd around, asking questions, offering compliments. A woman who introduced herself as the director of the city symphony pressed a card into his hand. A wealthy-looking couple asked if he would consider playing at their daughter's wedding. Through it all, Richard remained at a distance, watching. Only when the crowd finally thinned did he approach. Well, Leo said, still slightly breathless from the experience. Was that part of your challenge? Did I pass the test? Richard shook his head. This wasn't about our arrangement, this was about music. About proving something to Anton and to myself. And what was that? That true artistry can't be taught. It can be refined, directed, improved. But the core of it, that ability to make people feel something through sound, that's either there or it isn't. Richard's eyes held Leo's. You have it. Before Leo could respond, Dr. Visser rejoined them, bringing with him a tall, elegant woman with silver hair. Mr. Reyes, I'd like you to meet Victoria Chen, the Dean of Performance Arts at Manhattan Music Academy. She has something she'd like to discuss with you. The next hour passed in a blur. Victoria Chen offered Leo a position as an artist-in-residence at the academy, teaching a few classes, performing occasionally, but mostly having access to their facilities to practice and develop his own work. The salary she mentioned was modest by the standards of the people in this room, but more than Leo had made in the last 3 years combined. We can discuss the details later this week, Dean Chen said, handing him her card. But I want you to know the position is yours if you want it. Talent like yours shouldn't be lost to the world again. When she and Dr. Visser moved away to speak with other guests, Leo turned to find Richard watching him with an odd expression. You planned all this, Leo said. It wasn't a question. Richard shrugged. I made a few calls. The rest was you. Why? Why go to all this trouble for a janitor you caught playing your piano? Because talent shouldn't be wasted, Richard said simply. Not when it's genuine. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party flowing around them. So, Leo finally said, I guess this means I'll be quitting my job at Blackwell Tower. I suppose it does, Richard agreed. Though I'll miss having someone play my grandmother's piano. She would have liked your style. Something in his tone made Leo look at him more closely. Behind the confident, controlled exterior, he caught a glimpse of something else. Loneliness, perhaps. For all his wealth and power, Richard Blake stood apart from the crowd, observing but not truly participating. You could learn to play, Leo suggested. It's never too late, Richard laughed softly. Some people aren't meant to create music. They're meant to appreciate it. Everyone can create music, Leo countered. It might not be technically perfect, but that's not what matters. You said it yourself, it's about making people feel something. Richard seemed about to respond when a waiter approached, informing him that another guest was asking for him. With a nod to Leo, he moved away, back into his role as host and billionaire. Leo stayed for another hour, chatting with musicians and music lovers, accepting compliments and suggestions. When he finally left, his pocket was full of business cards, his mind buzzing with possibilities. Outside the club, the night air was cool against his face. He loosened his rented tie and looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city lights. Something had shifted tonight. A door had opened that he'd thought was closed forever. He could be a musician again, not just in stolen moments on someone else's piano, but as his actual life. As he waited for the bus, his phone pinged with a text message. It was from Richard. The challenge still stands. Tonight wasn't the test. That comes later. R.B. Leo stared at the message, a smile slowly spreading across his face. Whatever game the billionaire was playing, it had already changed Leo's life immeasurably. And despite his better judgment, he was curious to see where it would lead next. Life changed quickly for Leo after that night at the Athenaeum Club. Within 2 weeks, he had given notice at both his jobs, signed a contract with Manhattan Music Academy, and moved from his tiny studio apartment to a modest one-bedroom closer to the academy. The salary wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to live on, to live as a musician. His first month at the academy passed in a whirlwind of activity. He taught 2 small classes, worked with individual students, and most importantly, practiced for hours each day, rebuilding the technical skills he had lost during his decade away from music. His fingers developed calluses again, and muscles he had forgotten about began to ache pleasantly after long sessions at the piano. Through it all, he heard nothing from Richard Blake. The billionaire's text, "The challenge still stands," remained unanswered on Leo's phone. Several times Leo had started to type a response only to delete it. What could he possibly say? "Thanks for changing my life, but I'm not going to play your marriage game?" It was better to leave it alone, to focus on this incredible second chance he'd been given. Then, 6 weeks after the Athenaeum Club performance, Leo received an envelope with the Blackwell Industries logo. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum, hosted by the Blackwell Foundation. A handwritten note at the bottom read simply, "Dress appropriately." R.B. Leo stared at the invitation for a long time. He should ignore it. Richard had done enough for him already. He didn't owe the billionaire anything more. And yet he was curious. What did Richard have planned? And if he was honest with himself, he missed playing that magnificent piano in the penthouse. The night of the gala, Leo found himself standing at the entrance to the Met, wearing a tuxedo he had borrowed from one of the other instructors at the academy. The Great Hall was transformed for the event, with soft lighting, floral arrangements, and hundreds of New York's wealthiest citizens in formal wear. Leo felt out of place immediately. He knew no one here, and even in the borrowed tux he didn't quite fit. He was considering leaving when he heard his name. "Mr. Reyes. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." Richard stood before him, impeccable in a custom tuxedo, a glass of champagne in hand. He looked different somehow. More relaxed, less coldly perfect. "I almost didn't," Leo admitted. "But curiosity got the better of you." Richard smiled slightly. "It usually does." He guided Leo through the crowd, occasionally introducing him to people whose names Leo immediately forgot. They were just reaching the main exhibit hall when a tall woman with elegant silver hair intercepted them. "Richard, darling, you've been avoiding me," she said, kissing the air near his cheek, never intentionally. "Catherine." Richard's tone was polite but cool. "May I introduce Leo Reyes?" "Leo, this is Catherine Weston, head of the Blackwell Foundation Board." Catherine assessed Leo with shrewd eyes. "Ah, the pianist I've been hearing so much about. Richard has been positively effusive about your talent, which is remarkable in itself. He's usually so critical." Leo shot a surprised glance at Richard, who looked slightly uncomfortable. "Ms. Weston exaggerates. I merely mentioned that you played with unusual emotional depth." "For Richard, that's practically a love sonnet," Catherine said with a laugh. "Will you be performing tonight?" "Not that I'm aware of," Leo replied, looking questioningly at Richard. "No performances tonight," Richard confirmed. "Just conversation and too much champagne for a good cause." Catherine excused herself to greet other guests, and Richard led Leo deeper into the museum. They walked in companionable silence through galleries of European paintings away from the main crowd. "How are you finding life at the academy?" Richard finally asked. "It's incredible," Leo said honestly. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and be back in my old apartment getting ready for the night shift." Richard nodded. Reality can change quickly sometimes. They stopped before a painting of a man seated at a pianoforte, his expression distant as his hands rested on the keys. "I looked into your father's medical bills," Richard said abruptly. Leo stiffened. "What? They're paid. All of them. The collection agencies have been called off." For a moment, Leo couldn't speak. The medical debt had hung over his family for years, a weight they had learned to live with but could never escape. "Why would you do that?" he finally managed. Richard continued to look at the painting. "Because I could. Because it should have been done years ago, before you had to give up your education, before your family lost everything." "I don't understand," Leo said. "Why do you care? What am I to you?" Richard turned to him then, his expression more open than Leo had ever seen it. "Do you know why I keep pianos I can't play? Why I hire musicians to perform at parties I barely attend? Why I donate millions to music education programs?" Leo shook his head. "My grandmother was the only person in my life who saw me as more than an heir to the Blackwell fortune. She taught me music as a way to express what I couldn't say, but I had no talent for it, no natural ability, no matter how hard I tried." A look of old frustration crossed Richard's face. When she died, I inherited everything, including her piano. I've spent 20 years looking for someone who plays the way she did, with heart, with truth. Leo didn't know what to say. This glimpse into Richard's past, into the person beneath the billionaire facade, was unexpected and oddly touching. The night I found you playing in my conference room, Richard continued, I heard something I'd been searching for without realizing it. Your playing, it reminded me of her. So this whole thing, the challenge, the Athenaeum Club, even paying my father's medical bills, it's all because I remind you of your grandmother? Leo tried to make sense of it. Richard laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. But no, it's more complicated than that. Your talent deserved recognition. The rest, he shrugged, call it impulsive generosity. And the challenge? The ridiculous marriage proposal if I impressed you with my playing. Richard's smile faded. A joke in poor taste. I apologize. But something in his tone made Leo look more closely. Was it just a joke? Their eyes met, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Then Richard glanced away. We should return to the party. I meant to give a speech soon. As they walked back toward the great hall, Leo felt oddly disappointed. It was as if a door had opened briefly, showing him a glimpse of something unexpected, only to close again before he could understand what he'd seen. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, small talk, and excellent food. Richard gave his speech, announced a major donation to arts education in public schools, and was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and those seeking his attention. Leo found himself at the edge of the crowd, watching. Despite all the people around him, Richard seemed isolated, removed from the genuine connections that most people took for granted. He played his role perfectly, charming, generous, commanding. But there was a loneliness about him that Leo recognized all too well. Near midnight, as the party began to wind down, Leo was preparing to leave when he felt a hand on his arm. Are you free tomorrow evening? Richard asked without preamble. I have a class until 4, but after that, yes. Why? Come to the penthouse at 6. There's something I want to show you. Before Leo could respond, Richard was called away by another board member. He left with a nod, and Leo watched him go, curiosity once again piqued. The next evening, Leo arrived at Blackwell Tower as the setting sun cast the glass building in gold. This time, the security guard greeted him by name and directed him to the private elevator to the penthouse. Richard was waiting for him, dressed casually in slacks and a light sweater. Right on time, he said, leading Leo not to the main living area where the piano stood, but down a hallway to a door Leo hadn't noticed during his cleaning visit. I've been working on something, Richard said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. A project of sorts. He opened the door to reveal a small room with walls lined with acoustic panels. In the center stood a piano, not the grand piano from the living room, but a different one, simpler but still beautiful. This is a replica of my grandmother's first piano, Richard explained. The one she learned on as a child, and the one she taught me on. Leo approached it reverently, running his hand along the polished wood. It's beautiful. I've been taking lessons, Richard said quietly. For the past month. 3 times a week. Leo looked at him in surprise. You're learning to play? Richard nodded, a slightly embarrassed smile touching his lips. You said it's never too late. I decided to find out if that's true. Would you play something for me? Leo asked. Richard hesitated, then sat at the bench. Remember, I'm a beginner. Don't expect miracles. He began to play a simple melody, Beethoven's Für Elise, the beginning part that many beginners learn first. His technique was rudimentary, his timing slightly off, but there was an earnestness to his playing that touched Leo deeply. When he finished, Richard looked up, a question in his eyes. That was good, Leo said honestly. Really good for someone who's only been playing a month. My teacher says I'm too rigid, too focused on playing it correctly rather than feeling the music. Richard shook his head. I don't know if I can ever learn that part. Leo moved to sit beside him on the bench, their shoulders almost touching. May I show you something? He placed his hands on the keys and played the same piece Richard had just attempted. But with slight variations, softer here, louder there, a slight pause to emphasize a particular note. Music isn't just about hitting the right keys at the right time, Leo explained. It's about telling a story. What story do you want to tell when you play this piece? Richard considered the question seriously. I don't know. I've been so focused on getting the notes right that I haven't thought about it that way. Try again, Leo encouraged. But this time, think about why you're playing, not just what you're playing. Richard began again, and though the notes were the same, there was a subtle difference, a hesitance that felt like a question, a slightly stronger emphasis that felt like determination. When he finished, he looked at Leo with an expression of wonder. It felt different. It sounded different, Leo agreed. That's what music is, not just sound but feeling made audible. They sat side by side at the piano, and for a long moment neither spoke. The air between them seemed charged with something Leo couldn't quite name. I never answered your text, Leo finally said. About the challenge still standing. Richard shook his head. It doesn't matter. It was, I think I'm ready, Leo interrupted. For the test. Whatever it is. Their eyes met, and this time the door that had closed at the museum seemed to open again. Richard's expression softened into something genuine and unguarded. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Leo wasn't sure. Not about what the test would be, not about what any of this meant. But he was sure of one thing. Whatever path had brought him here to this moment was one he didn't regret taking. Yes, he said simply. I'm sure. 3 months passed in a blur of lessons, performances, and late-night conversations at the piano. Leo continued teaching at the academy, his classes now overflowing with eager students who had heard about the janitor turned pianist. Richard attended Leo's first public recital, sitting quietly in the back row but being the first to stand for the ovation. And twice a week Leo visited the penthouse to help Richard with his own musical journey. Their friendship grew with each passing day, an unlikely bond between two men from completely different worlds. Leo found himself looking forward to their evenings together, when Richard would shed his corporate persona and become simply a man learning to express himself through music. For his part, Richard seemed to bloom under Leo's guidance. His playing improved rapidly, and though he would never be a concert pianist, he developed a style that was uniquely his own, precise and thoughtful, with flashes of unexpected emotion. One rainy Tuesday evening in April, Leo arrived at the penthouse to find Richard pacing nervously, the usual piano lesson setup nowhere to be seen. Is everything okay? Leo asked, shaking raindrops from his jacket. Richard stopped pacing and took a deep breath. Do you remember the first night we met? What I said to you? Leo smiled slightly. You said a lot of things. Most of them weren't very nice. I said that if you played the piano well enough to impress me, I would marry you. Richard's eyes held Leo's steadily. It was a mockery, a challenge I never expected you to meet. Leo felt his heart rate pick up. I remember. I've been thinking about that moment a lot lately, about how arrogant I was, how certain that no one like you could possibly have anything to offer someone like me. Richard shook his head. I was wrong. About so many things. He gestured for Leo to follow him. They took the elevator down to the lobby where a car was waiting. The driver nodded to Richard and opened the rear door. Where are we going? Leo asked as they settled into the leather seats. You'll see. They drove through the rain-slicked streets of the city, eventually pulling up in front of a stately old building that Leo recognized as Carnegie Hall. His stomach tightened with nervousness. Richard, what is this about? Instead of answering, Richard led him through a side entrance where a staff member greeted them and directed them down a corridor. They emerged not in the main hall as Leo had feared, but in a smaller recital space. The lights were dimmed and the room was empty except for a grand piano on the stage, illuminated by a single spotlight. This is Vile Recital Hall, Richard explained. My grandmother gave her first New York performance here, when she was just 16. The piano is the same one she played that night. They've kept it maintained all these years. Leo approached the stage slowly, drawn to the beautiful instrument. May I? Richard nodded. Leo climbed the steps to the stage and sat at the bench. The piano felt alive beneath his fingers as he played a few experimental notes. It's perfect, he whispered. It was her favorite, Richard said, joining him on the stage. She said it had a soul. He touched the polished wood gently. I booked this room for the evening. No audience, no pressure. Just you and the piano she loved. Leo looked up at him, confused. Is this the test? To play her piano? Richard smiled slightly. In a way, I want you to play something. Not for me, not for an audience or critics or anyone else. Just for yourself. The piece that means the most to you. Leo considered for a moment, then nodded. He positioned his hands, closed his eyes, and began to play. He chose the piece he had been working on in private for the past few months, a composition of his own that told the story of his life. It began with simple, hopeful themes from his childhood, grew more complex and technical as it depicted his years at Juilliard, then became discordant and sparse during the years of hardship. Gradually, the music found its way back to beauty, but a different kind of beauty, deeper, more nuanced, tempered by experience, and finally, it moved into something entirely new, a dialogue between two distinct musical voices, different in style but harmonizing in unexpected ways, challenging and supporting each other. Without realizing it, he had composed the story of his relationship with Richard. When the final notes faded away, Leo opened his eyes to find Richard watching him with an expression of such openness that it took his breath away. Richard seemed at a loss for words, which had never happened in all the time Leo had known him. What was that piece called? Leo hesitated. I haven't named it yet. It's still evolving. Like us, Richard said quietly. Leo looked at him in surprise. The final section, Richard continued. It was about us, wasn't it? The two different themes coming together. Leo nodded, amazed that Richard had heard it so clearly. You've become a better listener than you think. Richard smiled, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. This is for you. Leo took it, his hand suddenly unsteady. Inside was a simple silver key. What's this for? He asked. A place I bought. A house outside the city with enough land that no neighbors will complain about piano music at all hours. It has a music room with perfect acoustics and space for a piano. Any piano you want. Richard paused. I thought you might like to live there, to have a proper place to compose and play. Leo stared at the key. Richard, I can't accept this. It's too much. There's a condition, Richard said, his voice losing some of its certainty. I'd be there too. Leo looked up sharply. What are you saying? Richard took a deep breath. I'm saying that what began as a mockery has become the most important thing in my life. You've taught me to hear music again, to feel things I thought I'd buried forever, and I don't want that to end. He took Leo's hand, the key between their palms. I'm not offering marriage anymore. That was a cruel joke. I'm offering partnership, a life together, building something new, music and business. Your talent and my resources, your heart and my whatever I have to give. Leo felt dizzy with the weight of what Richard was proposing. You want us to live together? To be together? Yes. Richard's voice was firm again, sure. If you want that too. The question hung in the air between them, as delicate and powerful as a perfect cadence waiting for resolution. Leo thought about the past months, the music they had shared, the conversations that had stretched into the night, the way Richard's eyes followed him when he thought Leo wasn't looking. He thought about how different they were and how somehow those differences had become complementary rather than divisive. I need to know something first, Leo said. That first night when you heard me playing your piano, did you really think I was good or were you just mocking me? Richard's expression softened. I thought you were untrained but extraordinary. The mockery came from my own insecurity, from knowing that with all my wealth and privilege, I could never play with the heart that you showed in those few minutes. It was the most honest thing Richard had ever said to him, and Leo knew what his answer would be. Yes, he said simply. I want that too. The relief on Richard's face was immediate and profound. He leaned forward hesitantly, giving Leo every opportunity to pull away. But Leo closed the distance between them, sealing their agreement with a kiss that felt like the beginning of a new composition, tentative at first, then growing in confidence and warmth. When they parted, Richard pressed his forehead against Leo's. I never expected this. When I found you playing that night, I was just looking for a reason to be angry, to feel something. And now? Leo asked. Now I feel everything. Too much sometimes, Richard smiled. It's terrifying. Leo laughed. Welcome to being human. They stayed at the piano until midnight, taking turns playing, their music filling the empty hall with the sound of possibility. When they finally left, walking hand in hand through the quiet streets of the city, the rain had stopped and stars were visible between the clouds. 3 months later, Leo gave his first major concert as a composer, performing his completed piece now titled The Challenge, at the very same Athenaeum Club where Richard had first introduced him to the music world. Richard sat in the front row, no longer a distant observer but an active part of Leo's life and work. The old piano from Richard's grandmother now stood in the music room of their home outside the city, where both men played daily, Richard with growing confidence, Leo with the passion that had captured Richard's attention that first night. And if their story wasn't quite the fairy tale of a janitor marrying a billionaire as promised in that mocking challenge, it was something better, a true partnership of equals who had found in each other exactly what they needed.